Hi, and welcome to our webinar series. This first virtual training pod is Finding and Cultivating Funders During COVID-19 and Beyond. My name is Ava Knox, and I am the Deputy Director of Grant Writing at Elevate. I'm also our lead trainer. A little bit about Elevate. We partner with nonprofits to build and run their grant programs, and we do this by helping them identify new funders, helping them build relationships with those funders, and then writing and submitting grants on their behalf. So this is a little bit about the upcoming series, and this is our agenda for today. So we're going to discuss what is a grant program. We're going to go through types of funders and grants. Then we'll do a little bit of planning and strategy, prospect research, cultivation, and then we'll close out. So this is our grant program cycle. As you can see, it is continuous, but we have planning and strategy, which leads to our prospect research, which leads to building relationships, which leads to writing the grants. And then we report on those grants and we steward those relationships, and then we dive back into planning and strategy. Now, chambers are distinctive. So there are so many different types of 501c organizations. Any 501c organization isn't technically a nonprofit. As you know, the most common of these are 501c3s. So this is the designation of public charities and private foundations. There's also 501c4s, which are lobbying organizations. And of course, you're familiar with 501c6 organizations. So these are business associations like yourself in your chambers of commerce that are formed to serve the interests and needs of your members. So chambers can function as both nonprofits and businesses. And like businesses, chambers sell things to clients. So whether it's a seat, a seminar, or an ad, or something like that. But like nonprofits, you're also shifting the nonprofit, the chambers are shifting towards improving your community. And so there's, you're looking for investors to help fund that cause as well. And chamber missions can relate to things about economic opportunity, quality of life, and other things that are related to that. So as a 501c6 organization, you can accept grants, but you are not considered technically a charitable organization. So because of that, you're still a nonprofit, but you are not, any donations made are not deductible as charitable contributions on the donor's income tax. So that's just something to keep in mind. You may or may not be eligible for different grants depending on the funder's eligibility requirements, but legally you are absolutely allowed to accept grants. So let's talk about the different types of funders and the different types of grants. Private foundations are the most common. They're essentially nonprofit organizations as well. They have a board, and they were founded by either individuals or families, and their giving is based on their endowment and their assets. So this giving is regulated. So funders have to give a set percentage annually. And the interests of their giving is deeply personal. It varies based on their interests, their passions, their values. This might be the values of the founders, or it might be the values of the current day board members, maybe their grandchildren, or maybe new staff members from outside the family if they've grown large enough, but it can be a number of things. There are different types of these private foundations, these private independent foundations. There's family foundations, community foundations, which are local and regional, or giving circles, which are much smaller. Then there's corporate foundations. And so what motivates a corporate foundation to give is very different than what motivates a private foundation. Corporate foundations are giving to advance their business objectives. So they're looking to, maybe they're moving into a new city and they would like to build goodwill with the residents of that city, or market to the residents of that city. So they're focused on giving in communities where they have strategic business interests. And then there's public funding. So this is local, state, or federal government money. And their objectives are designed to advance public interest. So it's shaped by policy and politics. And this is generally a slower process and a more labor-intensive application. So a little bit about foundation funding during COVID-19. We've seen that corporate and private foundations are taking different approaches to their giving, given the current pandemic. And and the economic recession. So what we've seen so far is that they're prioritizing general operating support, unrestricted dollars, as opposed to program support, that they've created these rapid response funds, and that they are streamlining their processes for grant applications reporting, maybe relaxing deadlines or reducing the number of questions. And this is a really interesting article from June in the Chronicle of Philanthropy. You can see that how nonprofit revenue has changed as a result of the pandemic, that actually grants from foundations has either not changed or increased at a much larger percentage than gifts from major donors, gifts from small donors, or earned revenue, all of which has decreased. And this speaks to the stability of foundation funding. And you can see some of the actions that they have taken to relax their giving processes. So let's talk about planning and strategy. Your prospecting should be driven by set goals. It should not just be a shot in the dark. So how do you decide on these goals? We want you to be realistic. This now is not the time. It is a better use of your time to set specific goals and seek funders for those specific goals than to just like try to get everything. That's not going to be effective use of your time. So consider your budget gaps, what programs need more funding, and then consider your vision for the year. So the conversations and research you should be having internally are about your strengths and challenges as an organization, your current grant program summary, your history of grants, and maybe even do a peer landscape analysis to see what is reasonable to expect for the kind of work that you're doing. So let's do an example. If your organizational strength is that your adult workforce development programming serves more people who have greater needs than your peer organizations, then a grant goal around that might be to secure public funding, government or funding for your adult workforce development program for the first time, and explore at least 2 state grants. If you have an organizational challenge that your youth mentoring program does not stand out amongst your peer organizations, maybe it's lost in a crowd of a lot of different youth mentoring programs, then your grant goal could support that to secure capacity building grant to improve the program design and the evaluation to thus strengthen the program and its outcomes to then be more attractive to funders. So again, some tips. More is not better. Fewer prospects are actually better. So not every type of nonprofit should be applying for every type of funding. You should be thinking about what types of funders make sense for your organization and for the interventions that you're utilizing. So what sector are you in? Are you doing direct change or systemic change? And then just think about the different angles of your program or your chamber overall and what strengths or challenges might be there based on the type of work that you're doing or maybe the type of population you're serving. Again, chambers are distinctive. So is your core purpose to sell services or to change the community? And the answer is probably both. So in that case, you're going to need to fund and work towards both equally. So because you all have membership dues and earned revenue, traditional funders might be a little skeptical about the need for funding. And so this is why we need to look at beneficiaries beyond your direct members who care about your communities. And cause-based fundraising might never replace the traditional fee-for-service money that you're getting, but it is seeming like more and more funds to support the community work is becoming a larger percentage of chamber budgets. So now we're going to talk about prospect research. This is the next step in our chart. So prospect research, the key here is to be really comprehensive. So you want to start really broad and then get more narrow. So you're not looking for just basic alignment or like, okay, if they fund economic development, check. You want to dive much deeper into what motivates them to give, what types of programs they like, what types of organizations they like to partner with, because fundraising is relationship building. We need to get to know these organizations so that we can form an authentic connection. So, and the goal of our prospect research is to help us determine these 4 things: who to ask, and who to engage in the process. So that means who, meaning which funder to ask, but also who, meaning which staff member or board member at that organization to be talking to. How much to ask for. This is really key, because if you're asking, sometimes even just asking for the wrong amount will disqualify you from receiving funds unintentionally. If you ask for a $100,000 grant and they only give $5,000 grants, they're not even going to consider your proposal, because they're going to know they're not going to be able to meet that need. So what you want to do is research to see what size grants they're giving and what is realistic with the budget that you're working with. We want to learn when to ask. Sometimes this is obvious. There might be a deadline on a website and then we'll know when to ask. But sometimes it's an open application process or it's invitation only. In that case, we need to learn a little bit more about when their board meetings are, what their fiscal year is, and how we might approach them with the best timing, and then how to ask. Again, this can go from something very simple to something more complicated. This is maybe just, do they have an application process on their website and it's very obvious? Or do we need to dig a little bit deeper to find out that they like to have in-person meetings and site visits before you submit a written proposal, or any number of things? It's up to their discretion, right? So we want to do our research to see if we can learn as much about the answers to these questions as possible. Okay, chambers are distinctive. So there's not currently a comprehensive list of grant makers that support organizations without 501c3s. So it's tricky, right? There's not just like a 501c6 database where you can just plug in your information and see who will fund you, but there are ways around it. We're going to have to work a little bit harder, so effective prospect research and cultivation is key here. So how to find funders. Strategy 1 is to identify peer organizations and review their funders. So you can find that information on their websites. If they have a list of funders, or if they have an event and a brochure, they might list and thank their sponsors, and that's one easy way. But if not, you can use GuideStar or Candid's 990 Finder to look up their 990s and see where they've received money and donations from. Strategy 2 is to build a network and be active in it. So I think you're all doing this a little bit already, but join associations and working groups, attend events, subscribe to listservs and newsletters. I mean, if you are doing grant prospecting, make it easy for yourself. Have them come directly into your inbox. Subscribe to your city or state's grants and partnerships office newsletter, and they will tell you when a new funding opportunity becomes available. I've listed a few examples here that are national and DC specific. Strategy 3 is research using a database and online search. Like I said, there's not one specifically for 501c6 organizations, but you can still do the research and see what you can find. So Foundation Directory Online is a really great tool to search millions of funders, and they analyze the data, and they also have webinars and classes and things like that. It is a paid subscription model, but sometimes public libraries have free access, or universities. You could look into that if that's a concern for you. But otherwise, I think there are different tiered membership levels, and I'll show you what you can get from there. So this is an example of Foundation Directory. This is their search box. There are so many different types of information we can search for, and what Foundation Directory pulls from are all the 990s of these foundations, so we can see in a really organized way who is funding whom. So you can search by support strategy or location or subject area, or if you know the name of a funder, you can search directly by organization name and find out more information about them. And so in this case, if we looked up the K-Fritz Foundation in DC, and they give hundreds and hundreds of grants each year, and I sorted this down by 2020 and interest in economic development. And this is just page 1 of multiple pages that I found. And each of these are clickable, so I can see, okay, they gave money to the Local Initiative Support Corporation for community improvement, $150,000. You can click on that and get a little bit more details about it. But that is a good way to see, like, okay, they're aligned with the type of work that we're doing. Grant Station is another option. It has current opportunities. It's a little bit more forward-looking. You can search private and public grants alike. And something cool that Grant Station is doing is they have a grant opportunities related to the COVID-19 pandemic search box. So you can you can use that for any rapid response funding opportunities that might be available to you. Another thing is grants.gov, and this is a strategy you can use in any database, but I'll use grants.gov as an example. You can search by keyword. So grants.gov is federal grants, and you can see that I searched by 501c6, and these are all the things that popped up. So this is good news. We can see that all of these have at least mentioned 501c6, so we're in good shape. And then once we click on one, I can see, okay, let me double check. So they fund business and commerce. The opportunity has been announced for chambers of commerce with 501c6 tax exempt organizations. Boom, we are eligible. This is good to go. So that's, while there might not be a database specifically for 501c6 organizations, you can use that search term to help narrow down the field in these other databases. Another tip is to check the eligibility guidelines on the funder website. They might tell you fairly explicitly that if you look at this State Farm Good Neighbor Citizenship grants highlighted right there, 501c6 chambers of commerce. This other one is from the K-Fritz Foundation, which we looked at earlier. I went to their website, and they will only consider applications for 501c3 organizations. So this is something that, again, I wish there was just one simple list for you, but you're gonna have to do a little bit of research. And so effective searches start broad and then get more focused. What keywords best capture your work? Maybe it's not the jargon that you're used to using in your industry. Maybe there are other words that you think funders might use that explain the type of work you're doing. So sort of search for all possible issue areas or all possible phrases. Definitely identify well-known large grant makers in your area. Who are the major players in your local community's philanthropic scene? And even if you're not exactly aligned with them right now, start to build relationships because they're influential. And again, review who funds your peers. Okay, so then you've started broad and then you refine. So now we're looking at making sure that your missions are in alignment, that they serve your geographic location, that the average grant size lines up with what your needs are, that you want to check the deadline type and the eligibility requirements of previous grantees. That's how you get really specific in your research. Some other tips, search press releases. So particularly with corporate foundations who are not required to put their donations in their tax documents, so it's not public information. They might, but because they have marketing or public interest goals, they might announce a press release. So you might see, if you search press release and a corporate foundation name, or you search Google News search, you might find some information about big grants that they've given away that they want to announce publicly. And then also, if you can find the list of board members for foundations, search their names individually. You might find their bios on a different website, an alumni organization, or their company website, and you might be able to learn more about them and what motivates them to give if you can find out more about them. And then we recommend you create a prospect summary. So make a research document for each prospect that is viable. So you might want to include funder contact information, their staff and board, their priorities, the alignment, their past grantees, including the amounts and the years, because that can be relevant too. If they've only given to, if the last time they gave to a Chamber of Commerce was 15 years ago and they haven't since, then maybe we need to find out more information about that. And then any application details. Okay, so that's prospecting, and our next step is cultivation. So we want to build relationships with these prospective funders that we have identified. This is the next step in our chart. So what is cultivation? This is the process of building a relationship with a prospective donor. And so you're likely already a national fundraiser, even if this feels uncomfortable to you. And if you're not, then you can become one. So all you really need is to care about an issue, to be unafraid to ask for what you believe in, to understand that relationships matter, and to know how to relate to decision makers. And I think these are all teachable skills. So why do we cultivate? We cultivate because we want a funder to know about you and the work that you're doing when you submit a proposal. When it comes across their desk, they'll have already seen it once. They'll have known your name. It'll be a reminder. It'll be a friendly reminder. You also want to confirm they fund 501c6 organizations. You might not know until you ask. You might have done all of those research tips that I laid out and that you still don't have an answer. So we cultivate, we just ask them. You want to confirm that all your other research is correct. Sometimes funders change priorities and don't necessarily update their website right away. This is particularly true in a global pandemic. Things might be happening behind the scenes that they haven't yet updated publicly. And so we want to get a phone call or a meeting of some kind to learn more about what's going on in the immediate. And then you ask questions to tailor your proposal to their most up-to-date questions. So you want to be as competitive and relevant as possible. So you want to find out what they're thinking about, what's on their mind, what they want to hear about. Now, who do we cultivate? We cultivate program officers or other staff or consultants of the foundation. If they're big enough to have staff, then they have program officers, and it is their job to talk to you. So you absolutely try to build relationships with them. Smaller foundations might not have program officers or even staff. They might just have their foundation trustees or their board members. And so we want to reach out to any of them that seem like they're relevant decision makers. And then we also want to cultivate, this is a little separate, but thought leaders or individuals in our fields who know funders, who can be our champions to funders. So maybe they're not directly affiliated with the funder that we've been researching, but they are well connected in the philanthropic world. And so that's who we want to be talking to and building good relationships with so they can be our advocates. So again, program officers, they are the primary ambassador to grantees. They are hired because they have issue area expertise and know about nonprofits. So they are, like I said, it is their job to talk to potential grantees. What they do is they promote your proposals to the board. They help you determine what a good request would be, both in terms of programming and a request amount. They can give you some advice about any questions you have about the way you're tailoring your proposal. And they can sort of help identify limits in your budget or in your timeline that they think, oh, if you're submitting a multi-year request, just know that the board doesn't like to see that sort of thing. They want something that can be accomplished in one grant period, whatever it might be, they have insight. And they're well connected, so they can connect you to other stakeholders and other funders. If their information isn't readily available on the website, if it's not always that easy, sometimes it is, but if not, you can use LinkedIn to build your network. And that is a good way to reach out, to find contact information about different stakeholders. Don't reach out directly to funders on LinkedIn. I didn't mean to say that. Don't just like message them your proposal on LinkedIn. That's not the right tool, but it is a good way to sort of get connected with a broader network. And one way you can also use LinkedIn to search effectively is to search by titles and organizations. So you can search program officer at K-Fritz Foundation and see who pops up, and then you can work backwards from there. You can also search for individuals using your best guess at what the naming convention is for their email addresses. You might see another person from that organization's email address, and you can guess, if you know the name of the program officer, what their email might be. You can also put their name in quotes and search Google and see what pops up. It's a little bit of sleuthing. And how do we cultivate? So we identify champions or connectors to advocate for our programs. Like I mentioned, those are people you want to just like have good community relationships. And then, so one way is to use that to get them to introduce you by email to a potential funder. If you don't have that warm connector, then you can send a cold introduction email asking for a phone call or a meeting. You could also, if you don't have an email address, but you have a phone number, you can make a cold phone call, totally appropriate. It's not always the best strategy, but if it's your only option, then that's perfectly fine. You might introduce yourself at an event or a conference if you know they're going to be attending. Obviously, right now, we're not doing things in person, but in general. Or you can send out targeted invitations to any work that your organization is doing. And then I recommend that you send follow-up throughout the year. Just update them on your work, maybe quarterly, maybe twice a year. Just any sort of personalized touch about the updates about the work that you're doing. And then become a resource or sort of a go-to person for this funder over time for the work that your organization is doing, because chances are if your missions are aligned, then you're trying to solve the same societal challenge. You're working together with this for the same goals. And so you'll want to be connected because you're in the same field. More advanced cultivation questions. Who in your organization should do the cultivation? So who are the best people to build strong relationships with funders? And this is not necessarily your executive director. This is, I think, a common misconception. You might think that the biggest title is the person who should be reaching out, and that's not necessarily true. If a funder is going to be asking you really, really nuts and bolts details about the work that you do, your executive director may or may not be the right person to answer that. Also, if your executive director is the busiest person at your organization, then they might not be the best person because they probably won't get around to doing cold calls, cold emails, and all of the sort of slower groundwork steps that it takes to begin cultivating relationships. So what do you want to showcase? What are the best forums to showcase your work, to invite funders to? This is tricky. This is tricky generally to think about, but it's also tricky now that things are virtual. So this is something that you need to get internally on the same page about events that virtual events or potential future events that you can invite funders to. And think about if current funders and prospective funders would be invited to the same types of events or different ones. And there's no one answer there. And when possible, if you don't have events like this, that would be good to invite funders to, start planning them. There's no reason not to, except for a pandemic. So once you can, think about sort of tailoring showcases throughout the year for new and existing funders to attend to see your work. Okay, so again, I just was touching on this, but a little bit more specifically, cultivating in a crisis is tricky. So take stock of your community's needs and the response that your organization is able to provide, and align your outreach to funders accordingly. So if you're expanding your services to address community needs that have increased due to COVID-19, then by all means, reach out to long-term and new funders about ways they can help, because you're doing more work now than ever. You'll want to review if they have launched specific funds, or if they haven't launched specific COVID-19 funds, then maybe reach out about how like a one-time gift now more than ever would be helpful. But if your services are not expanding, then you'll want to delay soliciting new funding until that emergency giving has slowed down. So if you're not eligible for that emergency giving and that's what they're focused on, this is not the right time to try to build a new relationship. They're a little bit distracted right now. So it's like important to acknowledge that, to take a step back, because there are other higher priority needs at the moment that are emergencies, but keep them on your list for the future. Again, to answer the question of like how to build these relationships now that things are virtual, we've seen a lot of different approaches to answer this question. So maybe you're having a virtual gala or a performance on Facebook Live, or I've seen organizations phone banking just to say thank you to their constituents or to their funders. So be sort of creative in your relationship building events. Cultivation emails, let's get into what those look like, because that is that's a key part of your cultivation tasks. And so what does it look like? You want a relevant and specific subject line. So here are some examples. And if you do have someone that is your mutual contact that you think would help get you in the door, include their name in the subject line so they don't delete it. You want to be straightforward and intentional. And most importantly, you want to be concise. You're going to want to not be concise, but I'm here to tell you, this is not the time to pitch your proposal. This is not your grant proposal. You want them to have questions about the work you do. So you're not telling it all in this first email, so that they want to meet with you and learn more about your work. So I'll give you an example in a minute, but so you want to let them know that you expect, if you expect an action, what it is, what's a specific date and time that works for you, what's a good follow-up strategy. Don't send this email late at night. We want to be as professional as possible. Oftentimes, these are the kinds of tasks that we don't get to during the day. If you're in a very busy organization, use your schedule send feature. You just want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. So don't reach out at midnight. And definitely include your contact information so they can get back to you. So here's an example. This includes a brief introduction of the mission and the organization. The second paragraph has alignment about why you're contacting this funder, what you all have in common, why you're working towards something that's on the same page. There's an optional third paragraph here, which actually I don't even recommend, but it's a few additional details about the program. But still, if you're going to do this optional paragraph, be concise. And then it concludes with the final paragraph with a call to action with specifics. So, are you available for a 20 to 30 minute call in the next few weeks? Below are the times I'm available. It's specific, it's actionable. This is, again, not the time to teach them everything there is to know about your program. It's to get them to have a meeting with you. That's the goal of a cultivation email, is to get a meeting. You're probably going to need to follow up more than once. I am encouraging you, I'm giving you permission to follow up to 3 times. Just keep it simple. Following up on this note, do you have a chance to speak? A lot of funders, more than you would think, appreciate this. They're very busy, they're inundated. They might have forgotten. This will remind them it's helpful to follow up. If you're going to request a call or a meeting via a cold call, have a goal in mind. So you don't want to be rambling, right? So you want to know what your specific goal of the conversation is. Is your goal to determine if we should submit a proposal for this program or this program, and we're calling them to figure out which they're most interested in? Or would they like a new program that's a pilot initiative? Or would they like something that is like tried and true and tested? Or maybe it's just to introduce your organization and find out what their submission process is, because they don't have that information on their website. Be really clear about what your goals are. And then research them before the meeting. So you don't want to ask them questions that you could find the answers to yourself. That's not going to make you look like you've done your research. So look at what their formal giving process is. And even, I would say, take notes on their organization before you call, but take notes on your own organization so that you have talking points to keep you on track. And tell your organization story, but be succinct, and you don't use in language, don't use jargon. You want to be really clear and direct and conversational. And then listen. You're gathering information during these meetings. So find out what is interesting to them, what elements of the program, what types of programs, what recommendations they have. Do they have other, there are other organizations that they think are doing good work in the field that you could model your proposal after? Like what else is there? Listen to what they say, and really, we'll talk about how to write a grant later, but really incorporate this into the grant that you write. And then ongoing follow-up, stay in touch. Make sure that they're seeing all of your activities and your impact, all of your awards, if you win an award, or if you start a new project, or if you have an event, any progress, just keep them in the loop. And then, one tip here is, if you have standard newsletters that go out maybe quarterly, take it and personally forward it to them with a note. So don't just add them to your email list, but add them to whoever's your cultivation person, add them to their personal reach out list and have that extra touch. I also recommend making a cultivation chart. So this is just a sample of what that could look like. You could just use Excel. It doesn't have to be fancy. And here's an example of what that might look like. So this is the funder name, the point of contact at this foundation, who's your board member that is going to connect you, or who's your champion or connector, and what is that relationship. And that maybe you don't have that, maybe that field is blank. What's your goal? Be clear. What is the history of this relationship? And then what are the next steps with a deadline? So you're going to schedule a meeting. If they reply, if not, research other connections. And then any notes. That's it. And I would do this for anyone that you've done the research for, you've determined that you're eligible to apply, and you're going to start building relationships. So my final tip here is to make time for cultivation. It is the easiest thing to avoid if you are a very, very busy person with a lot of work to do. So make time for cultivation. Set aside time once a week in your schedule to knock out these emails and phone calls. Just believe me, it's easy to avoid this work. And so you have to schedule it. And then make a cultivation plan for each of your top prospects. this plan, use that chart, but have an individual goal for each of them. Don't just lump them all together. Each one deserves an individual plan. Be unafraid of following up routinely. We talked about up to 3 times, totally appropriate. Don't hesitate. You're going to get better with practice. Maybe you're not an extroverted person by nature, but that's okay. Many introverts are excellent fundraisers because they can forge deep connections with just one person. You don't need affluent connections. You don't have to be like totally in the wealthy space in your community. You just need to be good at connecting with people, or learn how to connect with people. And again, there are a lot of different roles to play in the cultivation process. So this is, maybe there's someone who finds the funders, someone who builds the relationships, and someone who stewards the existing relationships. Those can be 3 different people. That can be the same person. But think about what your resources are, your staff resources, and your strengths, and figure out what makes the most sense. And then I really recommend tracking your progress. How many emails convert to calls? How many calls convert to meetings? How many meetings convert to proposals, invitations to submit proposals, and how many of those do you win? It's really good so that you can see long-term how this is all working out. Thank you so much for attending. For any upcoming workshops, if you want to know more about Elevate, you can visit us at www.elevateeffect.com. But thank you so much, and I'm available for any questions via email after the webinar. So thank you.